morning, everybody. Welcome. If you mean to be at a webinar on data and social enterprises, you're in the right place. But even if you're in the wrong place, you're in the right place. So welcome. Thank you for being here. My name is Geshi Karuri Sabina with the Civic Tech Innovation Network. And we're really pleased and proud to be hosting this session today. And just maybe, we get into these virtual spaces and we forget about physical space. So I just thought, we can't do welcomes and intros individually with everybody, but we thought it would be good to have a check-in activity we can at least share for a moment as we start. And so I'm going to pop a question onto the chat. I would just welcome you to open your chat area and see that, and just ask you to type in an answer, and it's a word. If you could be anywhere physical, I assume, but maybe not, other than here right now. Okay, let's assume you want to be here. So let's talk about the second best place you would be if you weren't here. Where would you be? And if you just give just a quick thought and just give us in the chat, and we'll see who's here, and we'll see where people would be if they weren't here, and then we'll get into the business of the day. Okay, so beaches seem to be popular so far. With family is a big one for many people right now. Oh, Vietnam. At work, it sounds like doing homework back in Zim. Yes, that would be nice with family. SpaceX in quarters, in the lab. There are a few with me in bed. Mars, yeah, that would be great. In the woods, taking a walk. In Kenya, in Mombasa. I'd be in Kenya too, actually. That would be a second choice. Anywhere but the desk. I hear you on that one. On the moon. Thank you. In a world before laptops were invented. Okay, but then you wouldn't be here with us. So thank you for being here, Emil. Playing outside in the snow. Okay, excellent. Creating code. Welcome. I think it's just good to be reminded that while we are on this screen, I guess there are other hopes and wishes and physical places or unphysical places and realities out there. And yeah, please do keep sharing those of you who haven't. So thank you so much for being here. As you know, our session today is on this topic of building social enterprises in Africa based on, digitization, data analytics, and all sorts of other exciting things that we'll get to speaking about. I don't believe we have to spend much time on etiquette anymore, since many of us spend so much time on the format. So if you could just do the usual, keep on mute unless you're speaking, and maybe cameras off unless you're speaking again, that would be great. Please do feel free to actively use the chat. And just to let you know, we are recording and live streaming. If you have any concerns about that, please send me a chat. I'll either try to explain it or convince you otherwise, because I actually can't stop it. But thank you for that, just notifying you. We hold regular webinars. We always make sure we have an article that comes out after them. So look out for that on our website in terms of summarizing key points. But we'll go for the rest of the time that we have today, about an hour and a half. We've got people across time zones, so we definitely want to respect the time. My only job, other than welcoming you and hopefully entertaining you, was to welcome our facilitator, who will actually be holding the space today. And she's no stranger to most of us. Leslie Williams is the CEO of Tshimolohong Digital Innovation Precinct here in Braamfontein in Joburg with the University of Witwatersrand. She is also well known as the founder of Impact Hub. We know her as being on the 4IR advisory panel with the Gauteng provincial government. Many of you may have caught her on her recent TEDx speaking, which was fantastic. But most importantly, she serves very capably on the reference group of the Civic Tech Innovation Network. And so we're really pleased to have her capable leadership, but also her willingness to be volunteered to hold spaces like this for us. And we love that she does that. So Dion says you're awesome, so you must be. Leslie, you're welcome. And I'd just like to hand over to you. Thank you. Thank you again for being here for us. And I'll hand over to you and your panel.
Cool. Thank you, Geshi, and the Civic Tech. Oh, I am on mute. Let's try that again. Thank you, Geshi and the Civic Tech Innovation Network team. I'm quite excited to be sitting at Simolo Home Precinct. I don't come to the workplace often enough, so you'll see our courtyard. In fact, right behind me, there's an experiment going on in terms of growing food. So very much in the heart of social innovation. Maybe just to give a touch of my background. So, I mean, my background is in the space of social innovation and social entrepreneurship. That's where I come from. That's where my heart is. And in the past 4 years, or 3 to 4 years, I've been spending, because of my job, far more time in the technology and digital innovation space. In the past year, however, I have been coming back home to social entrepreneurship. And I must say that within the South African context anyway, I am concerned that we are still stuck in old modalities when the world has moved on. There's so much opportunity in AI, machine learning, data and data analytics. And I'm quite excited that there is a bit of a blend and a bridge happening around social and digital innovation. And I think this is the moment to demystify what it means for social innovators and really look at what is the way forward from here. Now, we've got a whole bunch of fantastic speakers today, and I'll introduce them in a moment. But when I look at the participants who are joining, there's so much intelligence and wisdom in the participant group. So I want us to have a joint conversation today. We don't want to be speaking at you, but let's dialogue and let's see what we can unpack to co-design a way forward. So please jot down your questions. We're doing for about 40 minutes of panel discussions, and then we'll open up Q&A. So please use the chat line, add your questions, and we'll pick it up as we go along. So to introduce our absolutely fantastic speakers, I'll start with Caudia Juech. So Caudia, if you could show us your face. Caudia is the founding CEO and a board member of Caudia Foundation, which is a software company, which is the foundation of a software company, Caudia, which is headquartered in Silicon Valley. She's also a former VP at Rockefeller Foundation. So she knows quite a bit about the development space, and we're quite excited to also have a broader worldview coming from you, Caudia. And then Dr. Turgay Celik, who has 2 PhDs. Turgay, so Turgay is a professor of digital transformation in the engineering department, engineering in the School of Electrical and Information Engineering, okay, bit of a mouthful, and is the director of the WITS Institute of Data Science. So obviously WITS University that owns Simolo Home Precinct. And then finally another doctor, Malvin Nkomo, who also goes by the name of Meduna, and that's how you'll find him on social media. So I may use these different names interchangeably. He is the founder of Halo Technologies and Embedded Ingenuity. He's an engineer, a data scientist, and an entrepreneur. So again, multiple hats over there. So to kick off the discussion, I'm very keen to just get a quick snapshot. We'll call it a teaser because we'll go deeper into the conversation about what social entrepreneurship means in your context. Now, I don't want us to get stuck in definitions because in my mind's eye, you have from the Gogo in Soweto who's doing incredible work, but she doesn't have the tools to package her work and call herself a social entrepreneur. Social entrepreneurship has also become quite trendy. You know, I've been seeing big corporates calling themselves social enterprises, but when you look at the impact that they're creating, it's quite questionable. There's also social impact investment. So without us debating definitions, please give us a snapshot of what it means in your context. Caudia, can I kick off with you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Leslie, and great to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I think, so I'm approaching this question with a little bit of a cynic mind because I've, as Leslie said, I've been in philanthropy for about 15 years and I've come across a lot of organizations that call themselves social. I think one of the challenges with the term is really that kind of what it means it has basically been diluted in many different contexts. I feel in the United States, where I live currently, I was originally born in Germany. I mean, it can mean something from a kind of publicly noted company that is a Fortune 500 company that calls themselves a social enterprise to an organization that is much closer to a nonprofit. So I think what I like to see when we talk to organizations and we talk to enterprises is really either kind of a legal expression. So is this a B Corp? Does this have kind of a legal form that really speaks to the social enterprise, so that the kind of pursuing not only financial profit and a further expression of kind of how are these other aspects being measured? So what are the metrics and what is the evidence against those metrics? I think that would be my quick answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Caudia. Turgay, over to you.
Thank you, Leslie. So perhaps my answer will be much more shorter. And for me, I think the social entrepreneurship, or the entrepreneur, is the one who would be trying to create a positive impact, and for the public in general, as well as the livings of the earth. So those livings are referring to the beings in the nature and nature itself too. I think I would define it as follows. Thank you.
Thank you. And Malvin.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for the introduction, Leslie, and everything. I think I'm intrigued by the idea that people living in any society or any environment need to be able to transform their learnings and everything that they've gathered, be it in their corporate exposures and in academia or anywhere else, to use that intel and that knowledge to solve problems that they face in their communities each and every day, right? So the idea of solving your own problems, therefore building sustainability in the sense that you're building capacity within your environment, training people to be able to face problems that they're going to meet, and also at the same time being financially sustainable to run such enterprises. So when we think about social entrepreneurship, we always think about it's a non-profit organization or something, but it's more around building solutions that will be financially sustainable and also solving a direct problem that people are facing in that environment. It could be issues of housing, building low-cost housings, or new technologies of building houses so that people don't have to live in shacks. Or it could be an innovation to filter water so that at least people have got clean water. It could have been a digital solution for people to access maybe healthcare remotely in an environment where they never used to, so you're creating impact, but at the same time keeping that business live and being able to take care of your people and your personnel and your staff in the right way.
Thanks, Malvin. I like the point that you made there about solving problems in your own community, because it brings a sense of personal agency, not waiting for some sort of external factor or entity to zoom in. I want to kick off perhaps the next question with Turgay again. So Turgay, so we have this assumption that big data can tackle complex social problems. If this is indeed the case, please share a case study of where and how you've seen it be applicable. You're on mute, Turgay.
We just need to lay the foundations of the use case. So there are different use cases. So if we want to find something relevant to Africa, I think the food security is a big issue in Africa. And when it comes to the use of the big data, particularly we can use the certain data sources such as the remote sensing that refers to the satellite imagery. And actually, we can use the source of the data that comes from the satellite imagery to solve the problem of the food security, and particularly the mixture of the big data together with the AI that can be used to predict the crop yield, that can be used actually to enhance the food security in Africa context. I hope that this gives a basic example. And the thing about this example is, and most of the data resources that's available that refers to satellite imagery, they are mostly publicly available. And also you also need to have a platform that needs to process such a data. And actually those platforms are provided by the certain government agencies right now, so that you have access to the computing resources, and then you have access to the source of the data. And actually you can solve this, contribute to the food security in African continent by processing such data. And you can also use such information to handle the disaster. So particularly for the disaster recovery, and such data resource can be utilized especially for the recovery from the flooding, etc., the planning. So a social entrepreneur in such a context can be an individual who doesn't need to have a company that's established to solve the social problems, but it can be an individual who has access to such a data and then willing to solve this problem and make the corresponding outcome available to the rest of the community or the rest of the agencies. I hope this helps.
Yes, in fact, I'm going to link it back to 2 dialogues ago with Civic Tech Innovation Network, where we actually discussed food data. And some of the panelists were sharing that, you know, when there's been community organizing around food security during COVID, that in fact there were certain communities that have been overserved because there wasn't a central point of data collection, you know, so which is quite a pity because the resources were found but not getting to the right places.
So what you are referring to, Leslie, is more about the use of the GIS, Geographical Information Systems, for the distribution. And actually that can be utilized, and it can be an efficient source of the equal distribution. And the question becomes whether we want to use it or not, and who would be handling this. Actually, that will be the problem of the social entrepreneurs to address.
Thank you. Caudia. So Caudia, you support and invest in data for change. What are some of the innovative uses of data that you're seeing? And also that's quite promising, that we can also learn it from an African context.
So I really see promise in almost every sector. So my colleague already spoke to, for example, use in agriculture or in kind of natural disasters when those occur. But I feel there are really examples across. Financial inclusion is one. We are working with an organization called Women's World Banking that looks into, with commercial banks, but also with microfinance organizations around the world, at why a lot of women opening accounts, but then these accounts remain dormant. And how could the services that these banks or financial institutions provide be adjusted so that women really making use of those accounts and they either help them kind of grow a business or kind of support their family needs. Another example is a project that we have supported in West Africa, in Burkina Faso, but which is being extended at the moment to Mali and Niger and a couple of other countries. And there, it's an organization that collects on the behalf of the government of Burkina Faso diagnostic data and treatment data on diseases that affect children under the ages of 5. And so they have done, in those clinics where they have made those tablets available, collected about 6 million consultations. And these consultations are now being used to diagnose more precisely, for example, pneumonia There are kind of two different types of polynomia, as many of you know, and it's harder to distinguish between those two. And this kind of the data is being used to basically help distinguish and help make a more precise diagnose and help with the treatment. So those are some of the examples. But I think the key point for me is, again, I said there are opportunities in every sector. I think it's really about the enabling environment. Is kind of the environment right to act on that idea? I mean, the data alone is often not enough. Who will act on those data insights? And can the entrepreneur or can the nonprofit really generate that kind of chain reaction through the use of data?
Well, thanks. That actually leads us to a question I have for Malvin, who I consider our in the trenches guy on the panel, our entrepreneur. So Malvin, as an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, how does a social innovator even begin their journey around collecting and analyzing big data, especially when we're looking at like such long volumes? How do you just decide like which is usable and applicable? And you can weave in some of your own story there. Okay.
Thanks so much on that list. I guess just to answer your question and to contribute in that direction, the aspect of social entrepreneurship really needs a lot of thought in how you frame yourself as a social entrepreneur, and you discover yourself you'll be dealing with a lot of items that are somewhat very technical and very complex. And in that space, you need to find yourself building something that would, number one, be solving a real problem, and number two, also generating income for its own sustainability. For example, I mean, just in terms of computing space, for you to analyze big data, you need cloud computing space. That on its own, if you had to go yourself using AWS or Azure or Google Cloud Platform, you'll be paying like $10,000 a month, which is ridiculous, But organizations like Amazon, Google have got packages for startups that have got a social good, and they can actually give you free cloud computing space. So the biggest challenge is, number one, getting cloud computing space. You need to be in a position of being able to sustain yourself with the cloud computing space. Number two, getting the right team. So in as much as, yes, it's something for social good, but it goes back to building a proper enterprise-wide technology platform. For example, I can give you 2 examples. There's a platform called GovChat, which is a citizen engagement platform designed by a guy called Eldred Jordan. They're down in Cape Town, right? So what they do is they help citizens engage the government via WhatsApp, and these guys collect a lot of data points and a lot of data, and they use that to give intuition to the government as to what is this the people are needing and everything, And there is Namula, which is an on-demand service for emergency services, right? So that on its own simple means that people are not paying for this service, and number two, but this service is actually consuming money on the background in terms of cloud computing space, engineers to work on it, because engineers never gonna work for free, really, So building that kind of sustainable model whereby an entrepreneur comes up with a solution that people not gonna have to pay for it, and potentially the government could subsidize the sustainability of that whole model. So the government and maybe the people that have got the means should be able to at least sustain this platform, and this platform obtain or sees itself into the market without having to let the people pay. And there's a traditional thought in the world of data that says, if you're not paying for a service, then you are the product yourself. So if you find yourself having to use a service that you're not paying for, you need to be very careful whether you are the product yourself. Think about, do we pay for Facebook? We don't pay for Facebook. Do we pay for WhatsApp? We don't pay for it. But what do we end up having to do? You know, so these platforms help us to do all of these things that we do on a social, you know, on a social paradigm. But do those people actually make money? They make money out of the data. The data, what is the data? So data gives you the insights, and out of those insights, by developing using data science technologies, AI, machine learning, you end up getting to see certain insights. Out of those insights, you take those insights, then you monetize them. You know, so a startup that needs to solve data-related problems need to, number one, have a solid foundation of the understanding of how they can actually transform that data, and number two, they need resources in the form of computing space and engineers, you know, and stuff like that. Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be that daunting, actually, and I think, you know, it's also about rethinking where does in which point of your business model are you really deriving value? And like you said, it can also be expedient when you're using existing platforms.
Yeah, true. That's true. Yeah. So you can actually override, like Namula, what's this? GovChat. GovChat is using WhatsApp to engage citizens, but they built an API to connect to WhatsApp Business, and out of that, they're able to engage each and every person, and from there they get to using chatbots, you know. And you don't have to have people responding to you on the other side. And you use that data to actually train the model so that it actually gives you better insight of what the people are actually doing. So this becomes self-learning. The more data you get, the better you train your model, and it becomes a much robust platform altogether, you know?
So without dwelling too long on you, because I want to bring the other speakers in, but what team capacity do you need in order to enact or interface with these existing models? Because a lot of social innovators, especially coming from the NGO sector where this is brand new, is still quite overwhelming. You know, so I would say there's fear of tech, but if someone were to bring one team resource to manage what you're speaking of, what and who should that look like?
There's a lot of good ideas sitting with a lot of social entrepreneurs, but there's little movement in terms of implementing those ideas to be real products in the market that can actually have social impact. Reason being, in as much as yes, the idea could be good, there is still need for technical resources to transform that idea into a solid product. This is where you know, funding that gap is needed, because I can assure you, I'm an engineer. I know engineers will never work for free because there's always someone who wants to pay them, you know. So if you come up with a good idea and say, look, you know what, I've got a good idea, it's going to solve crime, it's going to solve, you know, child trafficking, this and that. Yes, it's a noble idea, but are you going to pay me for that, right? No, you know, we're doing it for the good. The engineer is not going to do that. So in as much as yes, that is true, that we need to be able to build these platforms, you know. So where do we close the sustainability part? Because these engineers need to be paid. So think about building a team of that. So you get a social entrepreneur who has got this cool idea, wonderful, brilliant, you know, idea. So at that point, that person now needs to lead a team of software developers. Usually you need a software developer, mostly at the back end, someone who build the intelligence at the back. Number two, front end, especially from the web perspective. And number three, you need a mobile developer who will be able to develop the platform either on Android, on iOS, or on the Juech framework. And best of all, you need a data scientist who will be able to take all this data that you've gathered and make better insights that comes back to feed and close the loop into the business, such that you better understand what is it that you're doing, you know. So you need about 4 people, you know, a back-end developer, a front-end developer, a mobile developer, and a data scientist. You know, because a data scientist can't exist on his own without these other 3 who at least help him to get the right data that he needs, you know. So a data scientist is not going to work on his own, but he's going to have to work with other people who actually help him to get the data in the best form. So you could have a lot of data, but it could be garbage data. you know. So build a system that will get you the real data that helps you to build the actual thing. Yeah.
Caudia, just building on Malvin's input now. What kind of almost tech maturity do you want to see before you're willing to invest, especially in data-driven organizations? And I'm also asking this because I'm seeing, you know, some of the leading social enterprises who have very clear metrics. They know how to communicate and package their data, and they're getting like quite decent funding. You know, at what point would a social innovator or enterprise come speak to you? Do they need to have that full package that Malvin is speaking about?
Before I answer your question, I just want to kind of second what Malvin was saying. I mean, that really deeply resonated with me. I mean, really that aspect of this is a team sport. I mean, we talk about data science or the use of data as a team sport. And I think often when people look at kind of the use of data, the data cleaning aspect, and kind of all the steps that need to happen before a data scientist can really use the data are really often significantly underestimated. I think the one role that we are also looking for when we speak to organizations, and I will say a little bit more about that in a moment, is kind of a person with domain expertise, a person that knows the data. Maybe that is the data scientist, maybe that is someone else or in partnership with someone else, but someone who really thinks about, so what do we believe about kind of the signals, the information that can be uncovered by using these data analytic tools and that can be turned into insights, and who really has the vision for what could be done with the use of data. In terms of data maturity, so just to kind of state, I represent a foundation. So we are not investing in organizations, we are providing grants, and we are working with nonprofit organizations practically to build their data capability and data competencies. And ultimately what that means, because our interest is either in kind of in subjects, well, where philanthropic capital is needed. So if the market works, great. I think that is the most sustainable and the best possible option. I think the foundations work in spaces where it's about de-risking investments, so kind of very early stage investments or investments that otherwise wouldn't be made because kind of market demand is unclear, or market might be really low income populations. And so it's about kind of who are the populations that really need that support, or is it about kind of helping markets kind of get to a point where this could be a sustainable product. But because of where we are coming from in terms of data maturity, ultimately, I think we would like to build work streams that help all of the organizations. So the ones that are at a very early stage, that are really still thinking about how are we building up those functions. At the moment, we mostly work with the ones that are very advanced in their data journey and who are already have a significant amount of kind of a level of data maturity, who have built, you know, some of that team that Malvin described, and who really want to kind of now advance and get to the next level.
Thanks. And what kind of organizations do you think social enterprises and innovators should be looking to support digital transformation and data capability?
You mean in terms of level of data maturity?
Yeah, I mean, if they don't have that maturity, I mean, you said to some extent you hold the hand to build the capability. What other institutions, if they're not present in South Africa, you know, we should be sending a message, you know, what are the ideal spaces, do you think, that should be supporting social enterprises on that journey?
Well, one of the you know, kind of sectors represented on this call through Turgay is the academic sector. I mean, a lot of times, what I at least see in the United States, but also in other parts of the world, is that nonprofits forge partnerships with academic institutions and work with, for example, teams of graduate students or the like. And that is, you know, some way of making progress. I don't think that's perfect. I think, you know, kind of because it's always a temporary resource. And I think the more this can be structured to really help the organization build up internal capacity, and really kind of make progress on the data journey, the better. But that is, I think, one way of doing that. Otherwise, I think it is really about kind of, I mean, there are courses online and you know, all of that, but I think, you know, you really need practical experience to kind of work in these complex areas. What are elements that we can maybe pair, kind of train the trainer approaches so that we can really replicate and get more resource out there?
Perfect, thank you. Sergey, touching on the academic realm, what role do you see for universities in accelerating data-driven impact?
Thank you, Leslie. I just want to touch on what Caudia and Malvin just mentioned so far. I think we just need to separate the enterprise, social enterprises from the social entrepreneurs. A social entrepreneur can be an individual who might be having a proper skill set and to make an impact for the general good. But then when it becomes an enterprise, then you would be assembling the set of the people who would be having the different skill set. As panelists just mentioned, that it is difficult for one individual to address all the problems when it comes to the data-oriented or the data-related projects that would be making a social impact. Then you would be bringing expertise from the different disciplines all together, and from the humanities to the engineering and the sciences. And so that they would be just thinking about all together. And that calls for a need to design an ecosystem. And so rather than skilling up all the individuals with the necessary skill set, then you can just create the links between these individuals in such an ecosystem, so that if the problem is well defined, such an ecosystem can just facilitate to bring the individuals and then solve the problems. So those individuals would be referring to the engineers who can use the open source data or the open source computing resources, and then there might be social scientists, etc. So they just need to talk to each other in such an ecosystem. When it comes to training, when it comes to social enterprises and the social entrepreneurship, I think the training should be more experiential training. So what does that mean is, let's say that you have a basic requirement for the big data problems, and then you just need to understand the technology, but also you need to ask the proper questions. And also you need to interpret those results and then apply it to the cases, so that you just need to bring all this skill set together. So the training should be handled by not only by the institutions, but also social entrepreneurs as well, because they come with an experience, so that they know how to take that know-how and then bring it up to speed and then relate it to other social entrepreneurs who wants such a training. So what I can say is, at the moment, I think when it comes to the training, the universities together with the social enterprises needs to work together to create such a training programs. And these training programs need to be accessible. So it needs to be available. And also the mentorship in such a training program is quite important. And these mentors should be actually the social entrepreneurs themselves. So they actually know how to take the problem and how to use the technology and how to relay the message to the corresponding audience. And so that this training should be organized between all different stakeholders.
And you know, from someone who's related to university, but not in a university, quite often I see researchers as mystical creatures that can come on board and help solve your problems, you know, do the back-end research. What appetite is there from research and perhaps, you know, postgrad students to partner with social enterprises to build the capacity, and what would they like in return?
Leslie, I was not able to hear the last part of the question.
Should postgraduate students and researchers come on board to partner with social enterprises on refining the problem and, you know, providing the back-end research? Number one, what is their appetite to do so? Secondly, what would they like in return?
Okay, and so actually there may be different drives for this kind of initiative. And so there is quite a good potential between the social entrepreneurship as well as the research that's taking place in the universities. And so that both needs to address the public good, public general good in the social general good. And so that you can easily engage with the researchers as well as the students to design the corresponding research problems that can be a social problem that the corresponding social entrepreneur is trying to address. And out of such a research, there will be different outcomes. And the first outcome would be the corresponding product, and that the social enterprise would be able to utilize. And such a product would be able to support the continuation of the research that is taking place within the university. And of course, that support will be in the form of the supporting the further students, and from the funding perspective, or the funding the corresponding equipment. The researchers themselves would be just receiving the different benefits from such an initiative. So the first one would be more about the research outcomes that could be actually for the benefit of the general good. And the second one, from my own perspective, would be the publication that's coming out of it. And of course, there can be interesting ideas coming out of this initiative that can have the IP, intellectual property, that can be registered as well. That will be also creating the extra income for the both sides, for the enterprise as well as for the university. Of course, in order to facilitate this, I believe that there is a need to create an ecosystem where all these parties comes together and then interact with each other. I think it's very essential to create such an ecosystem where the stakeholders from the different parties come together, training is taking place, and such an ecosystem should also allow, if a person comes with an idea, so that there should be intermediate personnel who would be able to link this person to the necessary resources. And there are some online platforms, if I may call it platform, where such as the datakind.org. And this place is actually trying to connect the individuals with the technical know-how and to the people who have the social problems. And so then individuals who are the part of this platform is making in-kind contribution. And then researchers or the social entrepreneurs are trying to reach to them as well. So I think here the training between the institutions as well as the entrepreneurs needs to taking place in such an ecosystem, so that there will be a targeted trainings. That's what I can say.
I think it's also about making these repositories more visible. I mean, I know, for example, SANSA, South African National Space Agency, is quite keen to get their satellite data downstream to entrepreneurs. Cool. So two things. I'm going to bring Caudia in, but before I bring you in, Caudia, two things. The one is to both Malvin and Turgay, please add the platforms and tools you mentioned in the chat. Secondly, we are going to open to Q&A shortly, so please start adding your questions to the chat line to the audience. Malvin, something for you to think about, and don't come in just yet because I'm bringing Caudia first. So both, you know, Turgay spoke about this ecosystem, Caudia spoke about an enabling environment. If you could start thinking about what actors would you find valuable in your ecosystem to accelerate your work and other social entrepreneurs you see around you. But Caudia, can I bring you in to touch on what Turgay said?
Thank you, Leslie. I mean, yes, on everything Turgay said in terms of building the ecosystem, and I will add another platform similar to DataKind that I know of in the chat. But I want to throw a small wrench into the conversation, which is that we talk about solving a problem, but I feel, in fact, you know, kind of when you work with data, I mean, you constantly need to adjust the algorithms that you use. So you maybe solve one problem, but you know, something else pops up. You know, kind of, you have to keep up with competitors. I mean, there is a reason why we talk about agile computing, and while you know, often things are not again, any more deeply tested before they are being brought to market, because the speed of kind of how quickly things change is so rapid. So I think one of the challenges that I'm seeing in the data ecosystem all around the globe is really what are kind of consistent solutions that we kind of consistent ways how we can work across that ecosystem that are not can go beyond the temporary.
Actually, I had this question for Turgay, but I think I'll ask it to you. You know, so at the moment in the world where we find ourselves, you know, COVID is our common wicked problem. But is it getting too much airtime at the expense of new data, or is there other problems we should be looking to solve? You know, based on, you know, like you said, data-driven new problems, if you like.
Well, I would definitely say climate change. I think climate change is the much bigger problem, and needs to be, we urgently need to do much more. I think COVID maybe in some ways illustrates, you know, what we can achieve if we all collaborate more or less. The experiences within the United States around that haven't been great in recent years, but I think, you know, kind of when you think about, normally it takes about like 5 to 10 years to develop a vaccine, like the ones that we are see popping up now, and we basically pharmaceutical companies were able to bring that down to about 10 months. I mean, data is you know, has a lot to do with that, and our ability to really process data. And I think also the vaccine effort in guiding that, you know, data is definitely at the heart of that. Yeah, that would be my quick answer.
Okay, thank you. Malvin, back to enabling environments and the actors you think ideal to come on board in your best case scenario.
Okay, I think I'm just going to add 2 points on that and give you a couple of you know, environments that I've seen help breed young scientists to come solve the bulk of these problems. And I think just to add on to Claudia's problem, to say, I mean, data has actually enabled us to reduce the time for sequencing. Like if you look at the Human Genome Project, it took about 13 years at a cost of about $1 billion. Now you can do it for less than a day for about $100, you know, just to sequence the genome. And that's why now you would find it took us a few months to actually get the COVID vaccine. And it is actually data that is going to help us distribute this vaccine. So the use cases are really, you know, endless. I mean, you can think of them from healthcare, you can think of them from housing, you can think about them from smart cities, you know, and industry. There's just a lot of use cases. But I'm intrigued by the idea that the academic community has come up with in a yearly conference called the Deep Learning Indaba. You know, it's run by a group of young, active data scientists led by a guy called Vukosi Marivate from UP, and Shakir Mohammed, who is based in the UK from Google, and a host of a lot of other guys. And this is just a consortium of young, brilliant, sharp data scientists that come together each and every year to discuss pertinent issues about how do we use data in Africa to solve problems in our respective areas. You know, I mean, so each and every year, this year it was supposed to be in Tunisia, but because of, well, this past year, I always think we're still in 2020, you know, because of COVID, it couldn't be there, but the initiatives are still there to use data to solve the bulk of our problem. Here is where I see there's a huge disconnect. And I think to tie Caudia and Turgay points, there's a lot of real estate sitting in academia that is still untapped. Why? Because it's just sitting in journal articles, it's just sitting in research papers. It doesn't even get to be translated to be on the ground, you know, because a social entrepreneur will come up with this brilliant research that is, you know, affecting communities, and they've got empirical evidence as to what needs to be done, but that just remains as a master's project. It doesn't get to be translated into a real life problem. So we need to kind of like bridge that gap. You know, that's why I'm intrigued by academia and entrepreneurship, trying to marry these two worlds, because I see us having a lot of these highly learned people, but our problems keep on increasing. You know why? Because we don't get to use the resources that we have to solve this problem. So there needs to be a lot of investment in trying to commercialize, well, not commercialize, but transform these ideas that are sitting in academic journals into real life problems. Why do we find ourselves in such a situation? Because we have to still deal with bread and butter issues. You know, I just want to get out of school and get to work, you know, and look after myself. You're really not that much invested in taking that idea and make it a real life issue, a real life solution. So if we could put more resources and concerted efforts in taking the bulk of it's unfortunate, it's not scientists to solve these problems, but it's social entrepreneurs from humanities, you know, sociologists and everything who see these problems. Then they need engineers to come and translate this into a solution, you know. So we're moving into a world where, you know, interdisciplinary approach needs to be fostered, you know. Gone are the days where we used to think, you know, engineers are the coolest people, you know, or this and that. Data scientists is the most sexiest job in the world, this and that. Yeah, in as much as that could be true, but we need to work in unison with other people who actually can identify the problems, especially social scientists. You know, they can identify problems, and what they lack is the technical prowess. You see, and having platforms of engagement between these people and the actual people who can implement these solutions is actually very important, because the engineers who sit at the back and to solve the problems technically, because they're domain experts, you see, then the social entrepreneur then comes in to understand how society is and how they would fit into the solution that has been provided. So yes, platforms are there. The deep learning endeavor is there. There's another platform called Zindi. Zindi is an open data science platform where there's a lot of challenges. People come with their problems, you throw in your problem, and different data scientists from different places solve your problems. But I still feel, and I think that there needs to be more resources poured into it, so that you know, these engineers don't have to be dealing with bread and butter issues. Because if I have to be dealing in bread and butter issues, the time for social innovation is not there. And this is the hard reality that I've seen with the bulk of the brilliant entrepreneurs that I meet each and every day down in Johannesburg, South Africa, to be more precise. So yes, academics needs to come close and work with entrepreneurs, because these entrepreneurs lack technical skills, you know, which is mostly seated with postgrad students at VETS, UCT, and all of these universities, you know, because they're just doing research that they feel that it's just cool for them, but it's not solving a real problem with someone in their community. And also, I think it's important for us to actually have this endeavor.
So I'm both frustrated and doing a happy dance that you named that point, because we really need to see inventions converting to real world social innovation. So thank you for that. I'm going to ask Turgay to comment on that.
I totally agree with my panelist in this case. And for me, I think the biggest problem that we are facing right now is the food security. And the access to food is a big issue as well. And the water is another issue. Of course, the climate is the source of many of these problems. But I think the use of the data to solve the food security issues might be an interesting area, must be resolved indeed, must be focused on. That refers to the precision agriculture, or if you just call it more like AI in agriculture, that refers to the use of the artificial intelligence, big data, IoT, sensors, etc., to have a better yield, like a crop yield, and how you can improve it to secure the food. I think that's the pressing issue here. The other issue is, of course, the climate is the biggest one. the water, access to the water, and then solutions, perhaps you can just imagine that we really don't need to make a big change, like we don't need to change the entire world. But just imagine that if you have a access to database where perhaps certain people just file in how they were just sanitizing the certain water resources, cleaning it, etc. And that is just made and available to another community in the different part of the world. That itself would be a huge contribution. And I believe that we just need to have the simple problems, and most of the times we really don't need to crunch the numbers when it comes to the genome, etc. Of course, this is important, but then our real life problems are smaller in scale, and that can be solved with a simple data gathering and then application of the big data or AI to those problems.
So, Turgay, before I open up for questions, I have a follow-up question to that, and maybe I'll ask Caudia to come in as well. So there's a lot of talk about, opening up a national data center. Now, when one thinks about, data governance, what should that mean in our context? And is there some sort of standard quality of data that should be considered when developing it?
That's an interesting question. The National Center in Data and making the data accessible to all the parties at the same time. It also comes, I think that's an excellent initiative. And at the end, the data is the commodity of the society, and the society itself is producing it, and access to that one also must be provided to all the parties who are interested in it. And but it also comes with its own problems. And while you are opening up your data center, then you need to give an access to data, and the data itself, the format of the data itself, is evolving in time. And the devices that we are using to gather this data is also changing, and at the pace that actually it's an exponential pace. And so that every now and then we would be having the different new data capturing formats, and that needs to also be designed in a way that the people would be having access to that data through the central data or the data center, national data center. I think it's an excellent idea, but it will come with its own problems, especially when it comes to the legislation. The POPI Act itself is coming up, and it needs to be applied. And also there are new requirements coming up, such as we won't be able to utilize the data using the basic machine learning techniques. Then we will need to focus on the explainable machine learning techniques. And that will be the part of the new legislation. Actually, in the United States right now, they are making it a part of the legislation that if you are going to apply the machine learning to the patient data, that those machine learning methods must be explainable. And of course, this data will be consumed by all these sort of the AI techniques, and this AI techniques needs to be explainable as well. And it becomes it creates a problem of who will have an access to this data, and how they will have an access to data, and how you will ensure that you will be able to provide the access while you will ensure that the privacy of the individuals who are contributing that data will not be an issue. And I think the National Data Center is a quite good idea, but will it be feasible is a big question. Because when we give an example from the different sectors, the data itself is a commodity right now. And how we will be enforcing the individuals who are creating such a data to share that data with the others? If I may give an example from the research. So every now and then, you would be reading these new research papers coming up with the corresponding methodology and applied on a certain data. And the researchers who create such a data wouldn't be willing to share it until they explored all the opportunities over that. Mm-hmm. Then the question becomes, when you create such a national center, how we will ensure that all the parties will have an equitable access to the data that's generated by the public fund is the biggest question. But it's an excellent idea, but it will come with its own challenges, I believe.
Thank you. I'll withhold my follow-up question for now. Caudia, do you have a quick comment on that as we segue an opener?
Yeah, I mean, data as everybody probably in the room knows, it is neither good nor bad. So it really depends on how we use it. One thing that I find very interesting when it comes to governance and security, and I hear talks kind of between US participants and European participants, for example, is that the kind of the data policies that are being enacted, like GDPR in Europe, which probably will not find its exact equivalent in the United States, that it has a lot to do with your culture. I think Europe went very far in terms of really risk mitigation, whereas I think in the United States, there is kind of more a tendency to focus on the opportunities. But ultimately, I feel all of these policies need to strike the balance between protecting the rights of individuals, protecting specific groups, but also allowing for the possibility to realize the opportunities that are there. I think what is my biggest concern, and I think Turgay hinted at that, is that, I mean, this is a super rapidly evolving sector, and a lot of the data policies that I see or hear about are in a way regulating the problems of yesterday and not the problems of kind of tomorrow. And for nonprofits, the organizations that we work with, it's even harder because kind of their understanding of the space is often limited. And how can they really advocate for the groups that they represent in the best possible way, giving that kind of it's even complex to understand what's possible today, but anticipating what will be possible tomorrow and how can we ensure that we as people are protected in the right way is a challenge.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm opening up the questions now, and I think the first one I'm seeing is from Shalane, who says, thank you for the information and the webinar. She needs some more insight or examples on how to build sustainability for the problem, because government in most cases has other priorities and ideas may go to die. So I'll open that to the panelists and see which of you want to comment.
I think just to jump onto that part, and I think the part of the answer would come in from what Caudia just spoke about now, and I'll try to expand on that. The challenge lies with the rate at which innovators are innovating and at which lawmakers are enforcing these regulations. So you'd find that it's like a guy who uses a Toyota Corolla to be competing in a Formula One race course. You know, you are out of sync in a way, you know, because you can't be competing with people using sports cars in a sports in a Formula One environment, and you're using a Toyota Corolla. The whole thing is just not built for that. So lawmakers are moving at a slow pace. Innovators are light years ahead. So in as much as we want to protect people's data and everything, because my argument is we always give out this data voluntarily, you know. Whenever we check in, you say, you know, just check in at this place, you've actually given data. That data becomes an insight for another business to advertise on you, you know, and all of that, in as much as we want governments to legislate the bulk of it, let's not stifle innovation by too much regulations. And of course, I mean, the challenge comes back to the innovators, because they want to move faster, but the regulations are like, you know, out of 1984, you know, and West in Africa, we're dealing with problems that the rest of the world encountered 15, 20 years ago, you know. Like now in Africa, we talk a lot about data science and everything, you know. We talk about fourth industrial revolution. Everyone just talks about the fourth industrial revolution. In America, they're not talking about that. They're doing it. They've been doing it for over 20, 30 years, you know. So we need to accelerate the rate at which the bulk of these things are actually being done, you know, transforming our education system to be in tandem with what the rest of the world is doing, and also to take the bulk of what we learn at school and make it actual solutions out there in the thing. Talking about governments funding some of these initiatives, it's a prequel in a way, if you may ask me, because I spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs out there on the ground. Entrepreneurs struggle with basic things like bread and butter issues around their innovations, you know. You find a guy still doesn't even have cloud computing space. He doesn't even have workspace. He can't even employ 1 or 2 data scientists, you know. And even if we were to build a data center, you know, and this social entrepreneur can't even employ a data scientist to come and work on that data, you know. So we need to fire from all cylinders. Yes, we can create this data center, but let's also look at different verticals that can complete the equation.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to comment before I take the next question?
Maybe just very, very quickly, which is, so when I was at the Rockefeller Foundation in a slightly different context, I was working on kind of what big problems could the foundation make headway on or make progress on. And the question is just, I mean, if it doesn't get traction with government, if there's not a market for it, it kind of is that, if it's a deep intractable problem, is now the right moment to either, you know, kind of really push on it, or is there a different framing, you know, kind of, is there a different kind of, can the idea, I think, you know, be reframed in a way that it would get traction, kind of where it hits the nerves of policymaker, or where it really would meet the demand of people who are willing to pay money for it. I mean, if I think about, I don't know, stop smoking. I mean, if in the 60s someone would have said, well, we will at some point no longer smoke in pubs and restaurants. I mean, you know, kind of, there was just no traction. I mean, the question is, you know, sometimes the time might not be right for an idea, or it requires further push, or it requires kind of a thinking, how could it be made attractive to the stakeholders that are being out there?
Thank you. And maybe just to the audience, if you do want to speak to a question, or if you have an answer or ideas as well, please raise your hand and we'll bring you into the conversation. So I think Vincent's question is quite linked to the previous one. And his question is like, with regard to linking government and hubs like Simolotong, how can you convince the government departments such as IDC in South Africa to partner with these hubs instead of being independent and supplying startup funds to individuals? Now, while the panelists think about that, because believe me, you'll make my job easier if you have the answer to this, so please put it forward. But a bunch of tech hubs in South Africa, you know, we sit in the same forum. And one of the things we're discussing is, you know, like, how do we support government in changing some of its procurement processes? You know, so in certain cases, they want to procure innovation, but, you know, right now procurement requires them to put out a tender and you respond to a tender. Now, there's often a clash between what the tender calls for when, you know, like Malvin said, social innovators and entrepreneurs are light years ahead. So a suggestion that came from one of our peers is that tech hubs actually work with government to help formulate wicked problems that entrepreneurs can respond to. But I would love to hear the thoughts of other panelists. Turgay, you've been in and out of Simolotong. We're still threatening to collaborate on something, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
And sorry about the video. I had to stop it just because of my bandwidth issue. And of course, for a digital entrepreneurship, I think the essential part is the digital access, what we are suffering right now. Regarding to question, I think definitely there is a need to collaborate with the institutions, and these institutions need to create the incubation centers or the incubators. And so where you can actually host these social entrepreneurs and then create the incentives for them. So in the whole world, actually, there are different incentives that are created within such incubator or the ecosystems, and such as that maybe a tax relief, and that can be given to the corresponding entrepreneurs, and that will be creating the supporting the ecosystem itself. And if I understood the question correctly, because I usually make mistakes there, And I believe that there is a need for the government to definitely collaborate with the institutions to support the ecosystems, especially entrepreneurial ecosystems. And Shmalogong, and there may be other institutions as well. And within each region, there should be multiple institutions. Each one of them should be supported to support these, create these ecosystems where you will be creating the social entrepreneurs. Actually, you will be supporting the social entrepreneurs. And will there be a need? Will there be a demand? Actually, we just need to ask for it. And so if we ask it, I think if we create a pressure from our side, I believe that that pressure can find an equivalence from the government side. And who can create such a pressures? I think the universities need to create it, as well as we need to receive a support from the companies who call themselves as a social enterprises, or the sections of the companies which are the social enterprise, that if I may call it. So there is a need to create these ecosystems that should be somehow supported by the government, but also it should be independent of the politics. And these centers needs to create their own ecosystem and raise the revenue and solve the corresponding social problems. And I think we just need to create the pressure from our side. That's what I can say.
So maintain those activists and lobbyist hats. Maybe some initiatives at Simolokong, so we work quite closely with eGov provincial government, and we've also been hosting a number of innovation challenges with the city of Joburg. Now, one of the issues that we are dealing with is the fact that, you may get financing and entrepreneurs may get support from one department to roll out an innovation, but because departments work in such a siloed way, it's very hard to find, to get access to the other department. Just to give you a practical example, one of our entrepreneurs, Nail Gutiri, won Hack Josie about 5 years ago that Simolokong hosted, and he won, R1 million. He's the founder of Pele Box, and they basically take smart locker systems and place it in various under-resourced communities, in clinics in under-resourced communities. So basically, instead of you staying in a queue waiting for your medication, you can get a one-time PIN, go and open the locker, get your medication, and go in under a minute. Now, the problem is, and the opportunity is that he got the finance, he developed the solution, many people wanted it, but social development didn't come on board to create access to to clinics in Johannesburg. So as a result, he's rolled out all over the country, he's crossed the borders, he's won various awards around the world, CNN's Top Innovator of the Year last year, but it's not seated in Johannesburg. We're not asking government for finance, we're just looking for a site. So that is how problematic it is. So we're trying to work with City to look at how can spaces like Simolokong de-risk access to innovations from entrepreneurs. So I don't know, Malvin, you look like you want to comment. You're on mute, your camera went on and off, but you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just nodding in agreement because I've seen this happening back and forth in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Like I said, I'm like really in the trenches. I work with entrepreneurs every day. I've seen brilliant young innovators coming in, solving problems, but try to give them access. They're not asking for a lot of things. They're just asking for access. They're asking for your endorsement and for just for a platform for them to deliver what they have in store. But those doors are not closed, are not opened. And it's true that a prophet gets not to be accepted in their own environment. But these are the people who are award-winning entrepreneurs in different ecosystems and places, So we need to really put it to good use that we have got these young, brilliant people solving our problems, and we need to engage governments. That's why we nominate them to be in the position of leadership, So a good leader is someone who just creates opportunities for their subordinates to shine, We're not asking them to solve the problems. We're going to solve the problems. Give us a platform.
So Mira asks, how can individuals contribute to via hubs like Civic? Is there any data science initiative to participate? So my short answer, and I'm kind of pulling Geshi's leg as well, in fact, all the panelists' leg, is that if there is sufficient interest, perhaps we can look at developing a community of practice. We'll go deeper into this topic and look at, what are the touch points of what we can create together and offer out there. So that is my response, but if any of you have any additions, also Turgay, who's down the road. Okay, you're virtual now, but technically your office is down the road.
Leslie, if I may add to that, this is an excellent idea to create this initiative, but perhaps we can start with identifying a question that we want to solve under this initiative, so that let's see that if we can tackle that question. So I think if you are looking for the data-driven entrepreneurship, first you need to identify the question. And most of the time, actually, you may not need to go through this big number crunching, etc. As long as you have an interesting question that even can make a minor impact on the general society, that will be more than enough for us. So perhaps out of this panel discussion, if the audience has an interesting question that we can address and as a group, and then we can start this initiative under Shimologo.
Okay. Thank you. Turgay, I'm not going to ask you to respond to the next question in words, but if you could chat, write in the chat. Heba asked, can Turgay kindly repeat or write what you said about Papier Act and machine learning? So if you could type that. And we're running out of time, but I want to grab one or two more questions. Geshi, please forgive me. So Siyabonga asks, are we not going to be realistic? Are we going to be realistic in terms of problems such as corruption when it comes to working with government? Who wants to take that one on? Malvin, if you have any experience to speak to? Or any of the other panelists? You're on mute.
Okay, yeah, sorry on that. Yeah, please come again.
The question is, are we going to be realistic with regard to corruption when it comes to working with government?
Yeah, no, it's a very volatile conversation and somewhat open conversation around, that you could be having a brilliant idea, but before they can actually even support you, some comrades want a share of it behind the backs and off the record. And corruption is a big problem in our ecosystem, But I like the idea of blockchain technology. Blockchain technology will make everything very transparent, and everyone, you can't delete records of any system whatsoever. So if we could think about now, right? If you have got especially now with COVID, right? If you're traveling somewhere, they want you to come up with a COVID certificate, stuff like that and all, right? But we know these things in Joburg, people cook them. They don't even have to go and do, COVID tests. Someone can do a COVID certificate for you, But if we had an open ledger system, like in a blockchain, where everyone's record of their testing is available. When you arrive at such a place, we check whether you actually tested on the time where you said you tested. Then it becomes more manageable. But we don't have that kind of approach. So instead of just spending a lot of, we need to actually invest a lot of money building a blockchain-based technology to track people with COVID, and everyone's vaccination records. No one is going to delete that. And if it has to be deleted, multiple sources need to be at least engaged and stuff like that. So we really need to move in unison with where technology is going to, and some of these problems societally can be easily solved by the right injection of capital in the right. I know a lot of young people who could come up with this solution in less than a month. you know, they just need funding, you know. They want to do it on their own, but they can't do it on their own because they have to deal with bread and butter issues.
Exactly. So, Keshi, I'm going to ignore your question, but I'm going to sneak in the last one, and then Caudia, you can add to that as well as part of your closing thoughts. Joe's question was, how do you work around the issues of costs, especially this information collection, looking at the fact that most social entrepreneurs and social enterprises focus on bread and butter issues? How do you connect with communities at broad scale to get reliable, usable data? How to incorporate or focus on the innovation aspect? So there's multiple costs, innovation, like overcoming costs, you know, when you're dealing with bread and butter. So Caudia, Turgay, closing thoughts there, and then I'll sum up.
Okay, so that feels like the $1 million question. I should get at least $1 million if I could, you know, fully answer that. But much more seriously, I mean, that is definitely a question that I hear all the time. How can organizations or social entrepreneurs get reliable and usable data from communities at scale? So if the data is not already openly available, how can we get to that? And I think it's often an aspect that really makes or breaks an idea. And I think it's, in my view, it's really about what would motivate communities to share that data that you are looking for with you? What's in it for them? You know, kind of what is the, I mean, I think one of the things that we need to still pay more attention to, and I think that is part of the success of Facebook and some of the others that we already talked about. If I share my data, there needs to be something in it for me. It can't just be out of the good of my heart or kind of supporting a model. It needs to solve a problem that I have, or a need, or, you know, something that I want to do. So that is my quick answer on that. Completely different in terms of closing remarks, a different observation that I want to share. And you know, as a German coming from a, you know, kind of very government heavy state, it's you know, it's funny probably that this is coming from me, but and also take it as someone who has never spent or lived significant time in South Africa, but now living in Silicon Valley, the conversation that we just had would be very different. It would all be talk about private equity, venture capital. The government would not play any role at all. It would really almost not feature in the conversation as other than get out of the way. And I think it's just something, you know, interesting kind of to observe that the conversation here is just kind of very different.
Thank you. So I'm going to attempt a summary, and I know I'm going to fall short because it's so much. So building an enabling environment and working as an ecosystem with multiple partnerships came across quite a bit. There was a lot of talk about existing tools that are there. We definitely need the backbone of academia, of government to come on board, recognize that we need to build capacity in social enterprises. And it's not going to take one person in a team to do the work, but, you know, building full-on capacity. We need to work with government to define clear problems to work on. Turgay especially pointed out a number of times the need to look at and solve food security. There are existing platforms that we can use that social entrepreneurs already have at access. We need to also think about who owns the data, especially when you start looking at, you know, even building a national data center, taking in on board the POPI Act, Personal Information Act. There is this disconnect between the speed at which innovators and entrepreneurs work, as well as government and even academia, where we really needed to convert the research into real life solutions. So my checkout question before I acknowledge the speakers, so this is the question to audience. Please share in the chat, what is one new insight or shift that you have as a result of the conversation? So what is one new insight or shift or idea that you have as a result of the conversation. To our fantastic speakers, I will allow you 30 seconds to respond to a question that you wish I asked you today. So what is still sitting in your belly that you feel has been unsaid? What question do you think I should have asked you? And what's your answer? So 30 seconds per speaker. I'll kick off with Caudia.
I don't have an immediate idea, so if someone of the other speaker has a quick idea, that they should go first.
Sure. Turgay, can I bring you in while we give Caudia 10 more seconds to think about it?
To gain a bit more time, Leslie, can you please repeat the question?
Sure. If there is a question that I haven't asked you, now is your time to respond to it. What's sitting in your belly? What do you still like to say as a closing thought?
I think what I want to say is we just need to be social entrepreneur before we become a social enterprise. And it takes the efforts of the individual to create an impact. If you are willing to do that, actually start with the cost and bear the cost and take the pain first. And I'm sure that you will be able to reach the necessary resources, especially in the digital space. If you have a digital access, you have the plenty of resources. And I believe that the social enterprises should come later, and we just need to change our mindset towards the social entrepreneurs, single entrepreneur.
Thank you.
That's what I want to say.
Thank you. Caudia.
More an observation than a question, but while I think there is really super high potential in terms of how data-driven offerings can fill gaps that low-income populations experience, I think there are just also a lot of inequities how these tools can be accessed. So one example, Turgay spoke about precision agriculture, and I think it is a very valuable tool to increase yields, but it's used mainly by corporate farms these days and kind of by large farms in general. And how can we drive down the tools that are powered by really modern technology to, for example, smallholder farmers? I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Thanks, Caudia. Final word, Malvin.
Okay, I would have loved us also just to look at just the value chain of how a data scientist changes the trajectory of a business, and what is it that we mean in quantum terms, how that data is actually the next big thing, or if not already. This is us looking at how we actually collect data. People think collection of data is just going with a survey and everything, doing all that stuff, So we need to utilize socially available data in different data platforms, how we can actually take that data, transform it, clean it, process it, visualize it, from there, monetize it. Just that entire value chain in discrete form. What is it that entrepreneurs need to actually do, and them building a team around the expertise, because a lot of people, everyone is loosely talking about data science, machine learning, AI, and all of that, right? But the process with which you can actually say this is an AI-driven system and what role does data play in it, I feel like there's a huge disconnect and loose talk around the whole data aspect in all of that. Yeah.
Thank you, Malvin. And thank you, fantastic speakers. With 1 minute over time, I'm going to hand back to Geshi.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, everybody. Actually, I don't have much to say other than just to thank you all for being here for this amazing talk. There's some great comments and insights coming through on the chat. Caudia, it's very early for you. I hope you'll enjoy your breakfast. For those of us who are in this time zone, we can enjoy, I don't know if it's dinner or cocktails, but not for you, Caudia. No cocktails for you at this time. So just thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Malvin, Turgay, Caudia, for taking the time to share with us and to have this conversation. There's so much I think we can pick up on. I love this idea about some community work we could actually get going with. maybe we can tap into Caudia from a distance. But Malvin, Leslie, Turgay, we're here. Let's do things. Let's make things happen. So thanks, everybody. Have a great time. Look out for the article and the recording.
I'm going to play in the snow now.
Oh, there really is snow where you are. Oh my word. Okay, sorry about that. Thanks, everybody. Go well. I think there's a slide that Mabato is going to put up now that's just telling you about what's coming up next from the CTIN. But it's really not to depart from this conversation we're having now as well. I think we do want to be able to really keep going with this. I mean, it's not just a conversation, it's things we want to do. Look out for our podcast series that's coming up on women and the ways that they're using civic tech creatively. We hope you'll enjoy that. And then we'll have more conversations to come. So cheers all, go well. Thank you.
Viva